Um, all aboard! Welcome to the All Aboard podcast. I am your host, Brandon DeFreitas, joined today by our reigning league champion, Jimmy McAllister. How's it going, Jimmy?
It is going well. I'm happy to be here. It's been too long since I've been a guest on the pod.
It has been way too. I know you and John Canellos, in particularly, have been throwing the shade on the message board while I have delayed bringing these back in for the 2023 season.
I think I'm just speaking for the league. I'm the only one that has the courage to put it out on the message board. Everyone's thinking it.
You have the courage, and you also have paternity leave going on right now. So, you know, I actually don't know if that means you have more time. It's hard to say.
I have different time.
Yeah, that's a fair way to go about it. But congratulations, of course, and welcoming you to the dad group in the league, the ever growing dad group. But
Thank you, thank you. It's
as
it's good to be here.
good to have you, Jimmy, as always. And you had a miracle win on Monday night last week. I thought it was going to be more difficult, but then Jimmy G decided to just take a crap on Edwin's season. And as a result,
uh,
you seemed to win with only one touchdown.
I was sweating every time Devontae Adams was wide open, 60 yards down the field with no one between him and the end zone. Thank God for Josh McDaniels and that horrendous offensive scheme.
His parting gift was a clutch win for you, because we're going to get into the scenarios a little bit more, but you keep pace with Ben. I believe you're ahead on points for. Whereas if you went into this week down a game, playing me with a bunch of bye weeks, it was starting to look a little bit bleak for you.
Yeah, no, this was a huge win to keep me in the race with Ben for the lead in our division, which is neck and neck at this point. I think I'm ahead on points for by like 20 points over the course
Oh
of 8
boy.
weeks, so it's effectively even. It is effectively still it's going to come down to the next time we face each other, I think. But we can get into that.
All right, all right. I love the proclamation. Of course, I think we have to start talking about Edwin's team. And as we get in here, it's been so long. I want to try to touch on every team. If we leave you out, we apologize, but we're going to try to hit on the biggest items here. And with Edwin, I don't know how he's 4-4. He has more points for than I do by 50. And he's 3 games back, which is just bad luck on the schedule. But devastating for him, number one, with Kirk Cousins out for season, and then Jimmy G gets benched. So he just picked up Taylor Heineke off waivers in like a last second move. If he didn't do that, I think it was starting to look really, really bad for his team here.
I mean, I'll go as Steph. I think it still does look really bad. I mean, let's not let's not beat around. And I think it comes down to the quarterback situation. I mean, let's not mince words here. His quarterback room is bad. No other way to put it.
This is coming from the guy sitting there with Hurts, Burrow, and Goff in your ivory
I mean,
tower.
look, I'm not saying everyone needs to have three top 10 options like I do, but Derek Carr has looked like a shell of himself down in New
He
Orleans.
has.
Uh, I mean, like their best offensive play is just to check down to Kamara over and over and over again.
It drives me
Maybe that'll
nuts.
change the back half of the season, but I mean, it's like he can't throw more than like 8 yards down the field. Heineke, we know what Heineke is. We know what he isn't. Best case scenario, he's a stopgap to the end of the season, and he's okay. I
Yeah,
I can see him getting benched in 2 weeks, and they putting Ritter back in,
that's
and Arthur
true.
Smith's march here to get himself fired by the end of the season.
It really is a bit of a march. I mean, I'll bring up Taylor Heineke last year, and this is with the Commanders. Like, as a starter, 18, 24, 17, 5, 7, 15, 21, 15, 14. I mean, like a decent quarterback too. And I think of the options available, it's at least like, you know, it's a step down from Cousins, but you go from like a QB1 option to low end QB2, like it at least helps stopgap it for Edwin.
Yeah, I guess it's certainly a stopgap, but I think that this knocks him very much out of that, like, could he compete for a bye type conversation into
Mhm.
the can he make the playoffs conversation.
Oh, it is tough because you look at our division. So you got me, Edwin, and Mark, and then you have Travers and Tam who are all but out of it for the most part for the playoff race. And I think the ease of the division, if you have a matchup against Tam and Travers, does help out all three of those teams. Versus if you're in your division, there's four playoff caliber teams and John. So as we get back to divisional matchups here, I think the schedules are in favor if you're in my division versus yours, which could help Edwin still sneak into the playoffs.
It could, but I think at this point, I mean, if I'm looking at your division, I don't know who else is really challenging you for the bye at this point
I
because
don't
they
want to
need to
put
make
I
up.
don't want to put that on record and put that evil on me myself, but you're welcome to, Jim.
I mean, I think it comes down to the fact that you have a 3 game lead,
Somehow.
and there's what, 6 weeks left in the season,
Yeah,
right? Did I have that right? So
you do
5 or
have
six?
that right. Yeah, 6 games left.
6. Yeah, 6 weeks, 6 games left. I mean, it would need to be an utter like implosion.
It would make up for the utter luck I've had so far, but it is a strong position to be in. I do want to ask you one question on Edward's team here, because right after picking up Taylor Heineke, he puts Jimmy G, Kirk Cousins. We'll ignore Dorian Thompson Robinson, but he starts putting guys on the block. This is a team we all said was probably going for it this year as his last year. I would just make that guess based on the age of his team, but are you saying you would start selling now at the deadline if you're Edwin?
I mean, if I was Edwin, I would, because I don't think you're going to get that much more runway out of some of those QBs. If he's making a playoff run, he's doing it on the strength of his running back depth and his skill position, his wide receivers
Well,
depth,
and Tyreek Hill
right?
being like the biggest difference maker.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill, banking on Devonta Smith picking it up. You're banking on AOC fixing the Raiders offense, at least like throwing the ball in the general direction of Devontae Adams.
Inbounds would be a
so
good start.
yeah, so I mean, like if I'm Edwin, and I'm not saying that I would be throwing in the towel for the season, but if I'm taking a hard look at my team, the quarterback position is definitely not what's going to make me competitive come playoff time.
Yeah.
And I'm looking right now at his draft picks. All he has this year is a third and a fourth, and then he's got a first, a third, and fourth next year. So
Hmm.
it's certainly not nothing, but it's not exactly what you have when you look at some of like the rebuilders in the league as an example,
Yeah.
and what they've been able to accumulate as far as picks go. So I mean, if I was him, I completely see where he's coming from in terms of making some of these sales, or at least trying to.
Yeah. I do think it's funny. I was surprised when he put Cousins on the block at first. I'm like, he has an Achilles, but I think we're probably pretty confident. I mean, how old is he now? 34, I would get 35.
I
So
think he's
like
35.
I think
Yeah,
he's gonna come back. So like I was like, oh, I'm a little surprised Cousins is on the block so quick, but I guess I get it in terms of because what I would do if I were Edwin was I'd just play out the string. I'm not buying at the deadline other than maybe small deals. I just kind of ride it out. You're already invested. Like, and I look at his assets that he could sell. Really, to me, it's Devonte Adams, Reek, maybe Javante Williams, like the guys who could really get him something in the offseason. Like a guy like Derrick Henry or Hopkins, I already think you're not going to get much. So it's not like you're gonna save value on them expiring. I think Mark already did that to Edwin. Edwin's already holding the bag on those guys, is what I'm trying to say. So I I think if I'm Edwin, I'm playing out the string, and Cousins is interesting because he has value and he's not helping Edwin this year. So like he could sell Cousins now.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I mean, if I'm Edwin and I'm looking at this team right now, I I think that if I just played out the string this year and then play it out next year too, I think he was putting himself in a position where he's going to be good enough to not be in the lottery, bad enough to not be competing, and just have some assets that are 1 year older. So I think selling off some of those guys like Cousins sooner rather than later, you know, it's a smart move looking ahead to the
Yeah.
next couple of years.
I feel like you just described the spot that Mark is in this year, but we can certainly get back to that. I very unfortunate for Edwin. I do think like there was a path this year for him. If Henry was what he had been in previous years, he got more consistency from Hopkins, and stayed healthy. I think Edwin could have had a much better year than he's having so far. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where he goes from there. I do have some insider information, and of course, giving you this before the league listens to this is a very dangerous move with someone with draft picks. But I did talk to Edwin before the podcast and received pricing on some of his guys. So the current ask on Kirk Cousins is a late first round pick, and then the ask on Jimmy Garoppolo is a late second round pick or a third round pick. That sort of like area. Like, and he said flexible to negotiations. So just wanted to put that out there to the league.
I mean, that feels about right as far as pricing goes.
Yeah.
I, not to well, I'm sure we'll get to some of the other teams, but it's not necessarily as unrealistic as some of the offers that have been communicated to
Yeah.
the franchises in our league.
Yeah. Well, I think we probably beat Edwin's situation down to a dead horse, so we can move on to another topic. And you're talking about probably the top player available at the trade deadline 2 weeks from Thursday, tomorrow, is probably Joe Mixon. The problem is Joe Mixon is owned by the co-owners, Travers and John Iannello, and the ask we've heard all season has been 2 first round picks. Now I have intel that it's gone down since then, but I do expect Mixon to be traded, and I'm wondering how many suitors are left. Again, dangerous to be giving you this on the podcast, Jimmy, but I feel like there's a deal to be had there for Mixon at some point.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I think he is probably, based on what we know now, I think he is probably the top known asset right now that's being shopped around.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's still, so I've been hearing the same thing that, prices have been declining a little bit. And I have to imagine that, waiting as we get closer to the deadline, depending on how the Edge Kings fare over the next 2 weeks, that price could either decline or it could just evaporate. If they rip off 2 wins here and all of a sudden they're in the playoff picture.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's a spicy take.
but
You say you're in on the Edge Kings and you're out on Edwin.
I don't know if I'm in on the Edge Kings yet, but but I can see a world where all of a sudden, there's a path for them to make the playoffs.
So I do have
And
to
you look
remind
at
you, they do only have Pat Mahomes at quarterback at the moment. Oh, Bryce Young.
True.
Never mind. Never mind. Okay,
No,
I'm
that's what I'm
standing
saying.
corrected.
Yeah.
Okay, I forgot about Bryce Young.
And I mean, Young has started to turn a corner a little bit, not on the stat sheet, but
Yeah.
On the field, and that they still have some folks that can go off for
Oh, for sure.
explosive weeks. Ken Walker, DK, Waddle. Um, Rashid Shaheed. But I mean, there's enough talent. Oh, he's got Gibbs sitting on his bench too. I forgot about that. So, I mean, I don't think that they're immediately going to turn on the afterburners here and rip off 6 straight wins. But I can see a world where
That's
with
interesting. Yeah,
Edwin's team starting to get injured, they start to make a little bit of noise, and all of a sudden, this talk of trading Mixon kind of he's no longer available to the league at
interesting.
large.
Interesting.
So
Yeah. Edge Kings are 3-5 right now. Lower end of the points for. They're about so actually they're only 35 points up from Tam or 36 points up from Tam. So not gonna have a tiebreaker, but with 6 weeks left, if they rattle it off, yeah, yeah, definitely a possibility.
they're I think the important thing, they're only 1 game back from second place in the division.
Oh,
There's another way of looking at that.
that's true. That's true. Granted, I think if that were to happen, that would kind of I could see Alex getting into the playoffs on your side. So like that'd probably be four teams from your division, two from mine. So yeah,
Fair.
or two or yeah, no, two. Yep. So could be very
Yeah.
interesting here. I do want to say one thing too. I think it has been good with John I joining the league. They're more active. They're throwing trade offers out there. And I think we do have to remember as well that it took us like year one, we're all feeling each other out on like pricing. We're 3 years in now, so it's like we have sort of the history of what guys have gone for and how people act in trades and all that. So John I coming in with a high bar for Mixon that we all sort of had fun ridiculing to put it lightly. At the same token, I would say I think he's going to get used to the league pricing as he gets here, and it'll be good for the Edge Kings.
No, I completely. I think that shake up in the front office was definitely a net positive for the Edge Kings in the off season.
Without a doubt. But I think one of the best parts of this league, Jim, is every single week now we have at least 2 to 3 matchups that have massive implications on the playoff, like on the playoff outlook. And you look even this week, you have you're you're playing against me. We're pretty close on projections, even though you're shorthanded, which is kind of a laugh for two 7-1 teams. But then we have Ben versus Edwin too, so we almost have the bye week battle out there. I do think if Edwin loses this week, the bye week is probably out of the realm for him at that point. Even if I lose,
Yeah,
that'd be 3 games to make up in 5. It'd be very difficult.
yeah. I think that 3 game lead you've built up in your division is going to very much benefit you down the stretch.
I think I'm gonna need it too because, like, just being honest, and I've said this to people individually, like I'm not blind to the fact that my team on a points for basis is more in the second tier in the league versus the first. So like I think there's some natural regression that's gonna come, and I'm gonna need that buffer to hopefully secure that buy officially. And then I mean I think the playoffs are gonna be a massacre. Like any of these teams in the top 7 can pop off any week. So like I don't think anyone's gonna be feeling
Yeah,
comfortable in the playoffs.
yeah. No, I mean I think it's a testament that how committed everybody is to this, that
Yeah.
we're in a place where everyone sort of is either in the mix or they're trying to lose. So
Yeah. Which is how it should be.
yeah,
Um, Other interesting matchups though this week, Bijan for life, John B is sitting there. He really needs to hold serve against the Edge Kings because he's got a chance to gain on some people in the playoff hunt. It's a pretty close matchup right now. I think once he gets Aiden O'Connell in there, it'll push slightly towards his favor, but a loss to the Edge Kings there would bring your scenario into play and would really, I think, push John B back to the will I make the playoff type scenario.
Yeah. And I mean, so John B, I think, is a great example of a team that has, I don't know. Do you think, maybe this is a question for you? What's your opinion on the John B rebuild? Do you think that I mean, his team has been, towards the bottom of the pack for the last two seasons. It's coming into this season, with a winning record, decent points for. Do you think that this is like he completed the rebuild, he's on the right track now, or do you think that this is, you know, just a little blip before he needs to go back and continue just selling and accumulating draft picks and drafting the Falcons?
Well, I was gonna joke and be like, Jim, I do the hosting here, but I like your question, so I will go ahead and answer. Um, I I look at John B's team and I think, he was the team that like going into last offseason, he had a lot of high-end young talent, and he still does. So I really like that about his team. The question, of course, is gonna come down to did he push chips in too early? And trading first for Jerry Judy and for Calvin Ridley. So that's where his first went this year and next year for those two players. Um, I think it's like if you look at his team and you strip out quarterback, which is becoming a bit of a theme, I think he's there. And I think he has more young talent than like anyone. He's got, I mean, Bijan and ETN might be the next like CMC, like Saquon type combo in our league. CD Lamb, I know Higgins has been disappointing, but Drake London, I think he's going to go up. So I think position player wise, he's as deep and strong as anyone. The problem is, number one, you get killed. You get killed with the unluckiness of the Kyler injury. That's just like you lose your
Yeah.
top guy, all of us are going to be hurting. Um, but then like Kyler, what is Justin Fields? Is Fields really going to be a starting next year? I mean, I think so. Maybe somewhere else, but maybe not. And then like Jordan Love, kind of don't think is good. Like I don't. Maybe I'll put that on the. I don't think Jordan Love is a good NFL quarterback, but he's been fine for fantasy so far this year. So I think the concern for John B going forward is without first round picks the next 2 years, how do you address the quarterback room? And he's got a lot invested in the basket of Kyler coming back, who he is, and Fields being a starter next
Yeah. I guess to play devil's advocate there, though, when Kyler is healthy, and I'm assuming here that, he's made a full recovery, he's played COD for like a year straight now, staying off that knee,
year. Yep.
But when he is healthy, his finish is 6-3-10, where he only played 14 games. And then, I mean, last season, obviously hurt in the middle, so incomplete.
He's
But I
been
mean,
good.
he has the potential to be a top five quarterback any
He
given season,
does.
at least a top 10, potentially a top five.
Yeah.
And if he's only 26 too, if he comes back, and I know a lot of ifs here. Cardinals don't draft a quarterback, they stick with
Yeah.
Murray. He might be good enough that you can get by with a less than good or a bottom end QB2 and still be
Hmm.
competitive.
Yeah.
And I would say Jordan Love and Justin Fields probably fall into that bucket. They've been
Hmm.
around the league enough. They've shown enough flashes here and there. Love a bit more on like paper than on the field, but
Yeah.
in theory,
Yeah.
he's learned for 3 years. I mean, you think we see it? It's the same thing that I mean with Ben. Like Josh Allen is so good that he can afford to have a QB like Geno, who, putting aside last year, is like a QB2, mid to low
Yeah.
end QB2.
Hmm. CJ Stroud. What do you think of CJ Stroud?
I he's accurate. He's just accurate as build.
Had to put that up there for you. But no, I agree. I think the possibilities are there for John's team, and it's so young and so talented, and like there is that option. And I think on Justin Fields, if he's starting, he's a top 8 quarterback in fantasy because he runs so friggin' much, you know? So he just needs a job. Um, so yeah, I like what he's done with the rebuild. And the other thing here with John is, and this will kind of bring in another team to discuss a little bit, like I like that John pushed chips in. And I think there are circumstances that led to this, but Will Tam's year 3 here, and he's gonna be in the lottery again. Like, are you gonna shit or get off the pot at some point? You know, like I would really like to see Tam do some building this offseason and compete for a playoff spot. If he goes into year 4 and is a tanker again, it's tough. I mean, it's tough on him. I know he wants to win, but like, what's the plan? You know?
And I was actually briefly looking into this right before we dropped up, hopped on here, because I was curious what, like, how is he in the bottom after like losing, selling, getting all these draft picks? Like, what's happened? And I think the story is kind of the draft just has not sort of broken his way, in that he's getting all these valuable assets in terms of good picks, but they're not turning into good players necessarily, or
Mhm.
elite players, like the difference makers. If I go back to our league last year,
So I know he's had
bear with me
2
for a
firsts in
moment.
both drafts. He got Brees Hall, obviously with the ACL. JMO drafted with the ACL, so that was year 1. Um, Anthony Richardson with the first pick
Yeah,
this year, who was looking like a big time hit, he got hurt, and then Jordan Addison, who just lost Kirk Cousins. So some circumstance there, but I will say I think I'm blowing out the candle on Jamison Williams. I don't think it's going to happen for him.
yeah, and I mean, some of the hasn't really had. Granted, none of us have really had much luck with our second and third round picks in terms of relevance, but I mean, like guys like David Bell, uh, like doesn't see the field. That was his second round pick, not this past rookie draft, the year before. Malik Willis looks like he's already lost a chance to be a quarterback after one season. Um, Zamir White sees the field. He could be relevant after Jacobs retires, gets traded, doesn't get signed, whatever it might be. So I think that's another part of it, is that, like, if we're comparing John B's team, he's hit on some of those draft picks,
Yeah.
at least to an extent, and I think I think that's part of the difference of why he was able to buy in, because he had some pieces that were shaking out his way.
Yeah. I think another difference too is if you look at Tam, it's been all rookie. Like I think drafting to rebuild it's an important part. That's where you get your young superstars. But I also think that like our lineups are so deep that you do need to invest in veterans too to fill out the team. Like John picked up Aaron Jones, Jerry Judy, Calvin Ridley. He picked up DeAndre Swift from me. So like those veterans that like they're no sure thing when you make the trade, but like, or I shouldn't say it that way, like they are at least proven NFL assets, so you know you're gonna get something, but you might worry about value going down and all that. You're still getting a player that's proven on an NFL level. So I think when you rebuild, that's sort of the template that I think works. You saw sort of I did it when I had 3 first round picks that year. I traded one for Diggs. I got Diggs, Olave, Garrett Wilson. Or you look at Ben this year, he took his war chest, pillaged John with half of it, and then, made some selections with the other half. So I think what I would like to see from Tam this year is a mix of veteran buys and rookie draft picks. But to be fair, there's no doubt that I mean, like all his rookies, like a couple of those are hits. Like Brees Hall's an awesome player. He it's just been injury that one ACL, you know?
Yeah. I do think that, you know, next year, once everyone's healed from injury, he has a pretty decent starting quarterback lineup here between Lawrence and, in theory, Anthony Richardson, assuming that he's able
Oh,
to stay healthy with his play style. And I mean, we were just talking about how, you know, that's an issue for a lot of teams in terms of having a strong quarterback room. I mean, he's kind of in the reverse here, where if this is healthy, if his roster's healthy, I mean, those guys could be playing for another decade
yeah.
and could be both top 10 options for another decade.
Mhm.
So I do think there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but I agree with how you framed it though.
Yeah. I think Lawrence has been awesome on the NFL field. He hasn't put up fantasy stats yet, which is a little perplexing. I would have expected by now he'd be putting up more consistent fantasy stats than he has been. I forget what the number was, but I think he's only had one top 10 finish so far this year in fantasy.
I I don't have the finishes on here, but yeah, I mean he's the number 14 QB right now, so
Yeah.
he's putting up QB2 numbers like between 15 and 20 each week.
Yeah.
So, and that I mean I think you have to believe like he's talented enough that, you know, as they continue to build the team out around him, as he gets better, that the fantasy numbers will come.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel that way too. I just an interesting observation, I think.
Yeah.
As we get here, we have 7 minutes left in part one. We're gonna break at some point and get part two going. I think the teams we still want to hit on, and we can hit on Alex and John with their trade last week. So I think we cover that in part two. We've talked, I think we want to talk a little bit more about Mark. And I think that hits just about everyone. We could talk about Ben. Do we want to stroke Ben's ego in part two?
I mean, are we stroking Ben's ego, or are we going to throw some cold water on this? I I don't know.
Well, we have 6 minutes left, so let's use this time right here. The Fatty Cats, Ben's
I
team, your competition in the power rankings for number one. My thing with Ben is I think there is more upside here as Eckler gets healthy. He's going to get Justin Jefferson back. Kelsey's full go. I mean, you could say what you want on Puka and Nico Collins maybe not being what they were to start the year, but I think Ben still has meat on the bone in terms of what he's scoring.
I think Ben is dangerous enough to put up 200 points every single week, any
Mhm.
given week. Like there is no doubt that he has probably the highest ceiling of just about any team in the
Yeah.
league when healthy.
Mhm.
They slowed a little bit with Jefferson out, but uh, still, Josh Allen can drop like 45 if he, you know,
Yep.
stops throwing interceptions. Eckler goes for like a 4 TD game. Feels like once a month. He'll just take over. So I don't disagree at all that he has an incredibly high ceiling and a very strong starting lineup. I think where we started to see some cracks, and I will say this is not maybe not cracks in terms of actual cracks in the team building, but cracks versus what Ben was, you know, proclaiming on the message boards all summer. That he had the deepest roster of anyone in the league, and injuries, like he was going to be able to run into any type of playoff scenario because he had so many high caliber roster players up and down his bench. I don't think that that's necessarily come to fruition the way that he thought it would. And I know some of these players are investments for like future years and could very well take over starting jobs in 2024 and 2025.
Mhm.
But I think that you have to be at least a little bit discouraged when you look at some of the guys like Miles Sanders and Antonio Gibson, where they just have underperformed this year. And then some of the rookies that, granted they're longer term plays, but they haven't really done all that much in terms of earning snaps, turning in production, Kendre and Tajay. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that he's had some pretty good health luck so far. I know Eckler was a big injury. I know Justin Jefferson was a big injury, but other than that, his team's been relatively healthy. I think as we start to get into the bye weeks, it's going to be a bit more painful for him than he would have had you believe.
I love it. This is what we wanted. We needed to get you a bed segment. I do think you look at his second round, Kincaid is starting to get going, but he's been a disappointment. Kendre and Tajay on the whole have been disappointments. I do think Tajay has shown a lot of potential. So I would be somewhat excited, ACL or not. No ACL or ACL, whatever it is. Marvin
For those of us
Mims,
who may not know, the Tajay Spears does not have ACLs in his knees.
wasn't it one knee? I don't know if it was both knees.
I thought it was both knees. I thought it was
Okay.
both knees. He had no ACLs.
All right. Well, I guess he can't tear them then. Um, Marvin Mims has been a disappointment. I know the thing I've been most critical of him was in that second round. If you're gonna draft Kincaid as the 11th player in a rookie draft, he better freaking become at least like Dallas Goddard plus. And Goddard's a good player. So it's like, I don't know, like unless he's turning into Travis Kelsey, did Ben really get return on investment? Like he's got to at least be Kelsey, Gronk, Mark Andrews at a minimum, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that tight end is just one of those positions where unless given there's only one tight end slot that people have to play. And two, I think like Kelsey, Gronk, and maybe Andrews, I think are the only three players that have put up enough to make it a like differentiator at the position.
Yeah.
Where, there's probably 20 tight ends who any given week catch three to five balls for 40 yards and occasionally get a CD. And that feels like that's just a dart throw any given week. Who's gonna step up in the red zone? So I know we're running out on time here, but here's one other thought experiment for Ben's team.
All right.
Because he hasn't shut up about Puka Nacua. And if I know Ben will tell you that, he read about the Breakfast Club meetings or whatever and knew Puka was good. The reality is nobody knew. That's why he was drafted in like the sixth round. But he's been a huge component, especially during the early season surge. And I would say that was not necessarily part of his rebuild plan.
Mhm.
I think this is obviously all hypothetical because he does have Puka. If he doesn't hit on that, do we call Ben's like drastic rebuild here still a resounding success if he doesn't wind up with the wide receiver,
I think four.
wide receiver 4 by chance?
It's true. I mean, I do think the second round was a little disappointing for Ben. So that's a good point. And the one thing I will say, like, if he ever made the claim that he knew what Puka was, why didn't you draft him with one of your million picks? That's
Yeah.
all I'm saying. And with that, we'll end part one. Jim, this will process. I'll text you when we're ready for part two, but we'll see you guys back for part two.